Welcome to the Leaderonomics show. I'm with Howard Yu, Professor of Strategy and Innovation from IMD Business School. Howard, thanks so much for being on our show with us.
My great pleasure to be here.
You know, you are very young, and yet you have so many accomplishments and so many achievements, and now you're a full professor at IMD. Tell us a bit about background. How did you get to where you got to?
Well, I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I had my all education in Hong Kong. And I graduated from my bachelor degree and thought that I want to become a banker. Well, in Hong Kong, you can only be an accountant or bankers, really. And so I worked as a management trainee in 2 banks. Didn't make it at all. I really...
Didn't make it, meaning...
I was really bad in what I'm doing. And, you know, I can think about strategy all day long, but when it comes down to execution, I just couldn't get it right. And so I was really frustrated and about myself. And I thought I want a new start. And at that time, I thought about, well, why don't we enroll to an MBA degree? So I attend a couple of recruitment talks by business schools around the world. And what turned out to be quite a disenchanting, disenfranchising experience was all of these talk about getting network from day one, polish up your resume right away, and trying to get into the job market. And I was like, well, actually, I want to take a bit of time off to take a stand back, to see what I truly would be about my passion. Now, on the other end, my family basically broke at that time because of after Asian financial crisis, all the family equity got wiped out. And so no way that I could afford the kind of tuition that a business school would command. And so fortunately, a friend of mine actually said, well, you know, if you try a PhD degree in the US in particular, it comes with a fellowship. And I thought, that's crazy, couldn't be true. And so I dug in deeper and so on. Then it was the beginning step of me transitioning into academic. And sometimes looking back is like, you know, invention, if it often happens when there's a necessary course.
Absolutely,
and
absolutely.
That's exactly what happened.
So you ended up going to the US?
Yes, I ended up applying to many different schools and out of desperation in many ways. So from Harvard to Washington and so on. In the end, I applied for 11 schools and there were only 2 accepted me. And it was an easy choice to pick Harvard. Still today, I thought they'd make a mistake. But I went in nonetheless and graduated in 2011. And since then, I've become a full-time professor at IMD.
And what drew you to this whole strategy and innovation space? I mean, is that what you did your dissertation with?
Yeah, so at the time I was really looking at organizational design because in any large bank, at that moment there was this almost like inevitable reorg around matrix organization. But in reality, from my own experience, I thought that that's a really strange design that you reported to 2 bosses. I still remember vividly at my very last role in the bank, I was an IT manager. So we had this huge rollout of a project that I'm the IT manager from Hong Kong, which is sponsored by Singapore regional office. And we had programmers in India, we had server facilities up in Shanghai, and it was all rolled into Dallas, the business unit headquarters. And it just doesn't work. And I thought to myself, I want to study organizational design. How come some management techniques turning into almost like a fashion fad that every company would blindly just copy regardless of outcome? So I thought I'm going to study organizational design in my dissertation. But at the time, disruptive innovation was a key theme at Harvard. And so my professor really encouraged me to explore that space. And I'm quite happy in the end of making that jump.
Right. And so what did you write on disruptive innovation?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough, my former advisor was Clayton Christensen, together with Joseph Bauer. And they opened doors for me to understand how do Asian enterprise move up the value chain and in many ways disrupt the global market. So at the time I studied the Taiwan PC industry in looking at how do these contract manufacturers move up the value chain to build a global brand and ultimately compete with HP and Dell in a global basis. Okay. So that was my formative year. Okay. And that still casts a long shadow to today's work that I do.
And then you transitioned to be a professor, right? Yeah. I mean, you went to IMD, and now you live in Switzerland. I'm sure there were many challenges, right? I mean, for a young Asian to be in Europe, to be teaching, to be talking and educating many senior leaders. Right. What were some of your challenges and how did you overcome some of these things?
Yeah, so IMD is a kind of interesting animal. Its main campus is in Switzerland, and it's got a second campus in Singapore. But in many ways, the school itself only focuses on executive education with a small MBA curriculum. And so from day one, I kind of got thrown into executive education. And that was 6 years ago, and I looked even younger back then. And so people kind of like look at you as like, what you're doing there. And I think I was fortunate enough that I joined IMD at 2011. The growth rate in China is still big back then, now slowed down a little bit. And for Western executives from Europe and elsewhere, people were really intrigued about this idea, how do fast growth economy, like today, even in Malaysia, really innovate by themselves? What do the common theme among Asian entrepreneurs as they compete globally? And what are the economic policy can help this industrial cluster to upgrade themselves? So in many ways, I just go back to my root and to talk about a domain that I feel most comfortable about. And in the beginning, we all learn by copying, right? So all my teaching in terms of content, I basically import at the time as the initial phase of learning breeding ground from HBS. And so I know from content-wise is bulletproof. All I need to focus is around how can I deliver the message based on my personal experience from an Asian angle. And so that allows me to at least have a niche market, if you will, around the executive education. And then I have a bit of breathing ground and learn more and learn the trick of the trade.
But I mean, having content is one thing, right? But also delivery counts a lot.
Correct.
And sometimes perceptions are built, you know, oh, this guy, you know, Chinese or you know, Asian in IMD. Were there moments where you questioned, you know, why am I doing this, and or struggles that you had, and what led you to keep fighting and motivated you to keep going on?
Right. It comes down to colleagues and people around you, for sure. I think I'm not the first Asian at the school, and my colleagues, no matter what their nationality, kind of understand what I'm going through. So they gave me extreme leniency, if you will. They protect me when things falls apart. So as simple as like classroom evaluation. You know, when I did well, I see email go viral within the school. When I'm not doing so well, nobody say anything, it's hushed. And you just felt like you owed a big favor to your colleagues, and you just keep on trying. I think ultimately what motivates me is the sense of community. It can be found in workplace, some people find it in the local neighborhood, some people find it in their family ties, and that keeps us all going, I suppose.
Fantastic. Howard, we're going to take a quick break right now. We'll be right back here on the Leaderonomics Show with Howard Yu. Welcome back to the Leaderonomics Show. I'm with Howard Yu, professor at IMD Business School. Howard, you know, you were talking a bit about your life and how you've somehow transitioned or got into this whole academic space. I'm sure today, right, you know, I know in the early days you were probably accumulating a lot of research for others, but I'm sure you do a lot of your own research now, and I'm sure you have a lot of insights in the space of strategy, innovation, and driving, you know, change in businesses. Tell us a bit about, you know, some of the exciting things you're working on and some of the latest insights that you can share with our viewers.
Yeah, so partially because of the close link with executive education, a lot of my research really tied with my personal up-close observation during conversation with key executive. And I still remember when I first moved to Switzerland, I had a little trip to Basel, the pharmaceutical cluster. Because these days people always talking about, you know, how to compete in a world when everything can be copied. And the textile industry is a prime example. It started off from the UK during the Great Industrial Revolution, migrate to the US, and then later on to Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and then to China, and then to Bangladesh, India, is the perpetual race to the bottom. And so when I was touring around Basel, to my great astonishment, all of these like Novartis, Roche, they have been settled in Rhine River for centuries. And to me, it's like, how could that happen? When automotive, healthcare device, you know, wind turbine, all migrate to other world. How do Switzerland and Swiss company in general compete and stay on top of the game? And that becomes the main thrust of my research these days, around how can companies thrive in a world when everything can be copied.
Can you answer that? I mean, would you be able to answer that?
Right. So if you look into the predecessor of Novartis and so on, they actually start as textile dye company. So they were making chemical dye for textile industry. And some of these chemists just noticed, wow, there is medicinal property of this chemical dye. So this is how Ciba-Geigy, the predecessor of Novartis, came into being as to the first generation of pharmaceutical industry. Now, so after Second World War, then the industry really moved from a chemical-based discipline into microbiology because of the advance of microscope, the understanding of antibiotics, and then you start to see all these Swiss companies together with Pfizer in the US and other US companies go to do soil screening program to hunt for the next antibiotics. So from chemistry to microbiology. Yeah. And then later on, of course, the late 70s, that's the bioengineering revolution. And that came along from the understanding of human chromosome and so on. Now, what's interesting, of course, is when an industry actually moved from one discipline to another, making all this crazy leap, then incumbent who can follow these jumps can actually stay on top of the game. Yep. Now, if you contrast with automotive industry, right, until most recently, it's still mechanical or electrical. And it's that stagnation of knowledge discipline that allows other latecomer, particularly in Asia, to take over. To give you a final imagery in your mind, it's like, competition is like mountaineering. In a static mountain, the latecomer eventually would reach the same altitude. But in a place where this discipline continue to move and leap, it's like mudslide that push people down. And in those games, it's the most experienced one with the greatest resources to innovate on top will reach to the mountaintop quicker than others.
But why is it that some companies or some industries have done that successfully? I mean, we talk about the pharmaceutical pieces, whereas some don't. Is there inherently leadership or some other elements that is consistently pushing these guys to always think the next thing versus being a stagnant, being on a stagnant slope?
Yeah, so I think we could, strategy and leadership always intertwine, and the two go hand in hand. And so the second part of my research is basically trying to address your question. Because if I look across the world, as mundane as like laundry detergent or dishwashing, detergent, and then you have companies from Unilever to Procter & Gamble still staying on top of the game. So I was trying to resolve that anomaly. In industry where it looks low-tech, in industry where the underlying discipline has never been infused by university research and things like that, and it's not information technologies, how can this incumbent continue to reinvent itself? And if you look across the long years of history of Procter & Gamble, for example, it really started off as, again, is basically mechanical engineering, because nobody understands how to make soap except using the traditional formula. Until the 20th century, soap making is still very traditional. You burn natural fat and oil and make that. And so what dominates the industry is scale of manufacturing. That's Henry Ford, the massive mechanical devices in factory and so on. Then consumer psychology came along. All of a sudden people understand by making cheap soap is not enough. You actually need to entice customer to buy them. And so the boom of consumer psychology, this is what Procter & Gamble seizes upon early. And then later, the artificial detergent came along after Second World War, and P&G again embraced organic chemistry as the next growth engine. And today, of course, design thinkings and Internet of Things. So in an industry where you find yourself getting stuck with a knowledge discipline actually stagnate, then is the role of the leadership to embrace the next big thing and infuse in your own way to rejuvenate your core business. It sounds very conventional, but when it comes back down to implementation,
that's where the problem.
It's actually very tough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen companies like General Electric and a few others that try to, move to the next level, but
correct.
The journey is a tedious one as you try to build up to that piece, right?
Because you really undermine the dominant logic of the firm. To shift a paradigm, essentially, you throw out the way you work in the past. and the vested interest group, the dominant coalition of the organization needs to shift.
Last quick question before we close the segment. You know, in Asia, right, there are a lot of companies that aspire to be global, that aspire to try to get to this level, but yet they struggle. You know, is the problem a strategic one, meaning the inability to really come up with strategic innovations, or is it more a belief problem where just Asians, or is it a capability issue that we just can't do this in Asia?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to part of it can be addressed by entrepreneur, part of it needs to be addressed by policymakers and government. So from the entrepreneur angle, I think the opportunity is becoming more and more abundant. Because I was talking with a taxi driver on my way here, and he was describing how your local post office is doing something almost like the Amazon lockers. And so the natural evolution is the consumer behavior is converging. So what works in Asia could potentially have a big market outside. Right. This is why you start to see Alibaba, Tencent, and all this Xiaomi, all this guy going outside of Asia. So that's really good news for entrepreneur. But then, of course, at the institutional environment, how do we get funding, the capital expenditure, and getting into the ability to pay a equivalent salary when you try to attract the best brain in Silicon Valley. That require capital investment, require bank loans and things, and small, medium-sized enterprise in this part of the world always struggle for capital expenditure and also the changing regulation as well. So if entrepreneur couldn't have the environment to take a long-term perspective, that hamper real type of innovation. If entrepreneur couldn't get enough capital, access to capital per se, that it hampers them to go abroad. So these are the kind of things that I think a policymaker can rethink about, and for entrepreneur, they have to go abroad because that's the best way to benchmark your service and product to reach the world-class level.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break right now and we'll be right back here on the Leaderonomics show. Welcome back to the last segment of the Leaderonomics show with Howard Yu. Howard, we were talking about a lot of things, specifically strategy. One of the things you brought up was the struggle that small, medium enterprises, SMEs have. How, many SMEs aspire to scale and become this global organization, but they struggle. What advice would you give an SME leader or an owner and say, here, do this and this will help you to scale?
Yeah, so in the theory of disruption, we oftentimes see company, the first thing that they have to see is seize upon a niche market. Usually, oftentimes it's low end, providing simple product, and then grow from there. And the way to grow is to, this almost obsession about customer. Is this understanding what exactly do they need, an articulated need. And so these days, of course, in the face of Uber, in the face of Amazon, people get scared. But I had an opportunity to talk with a couple of small, medium-sized enterprises in Japan, actually. And the conclusion is, if you zoom into a sector and try to understand how can we reintegrate from big data analytics to AI, because these days are so many independent service providers that you can integrate, you can actually create an end-to-end customer experience that Google and Facebook are not going to pay attention to. And so although AI is fast becoming a reality, but the integration and making it tangible as a service offering, we still have quite a bit of space for companies to specialize. And this is the great opportunity of ubiquitous connectivity. It lowers the bar of entrance. And if you are able to connect suppliers and customers together in a space that deliver this unparalleled customer experience, that is the way to forge forward. Okay. So in short is don't get too scared about the big guys because they're always looking for huge opportunities. Right. For you to scale is to how can I reintegrate new type of capability so that your traditional offering to become the next level more attractive to your target audience.
And the other thing I notice in Asia is that when we look at scaling and stuff, we always say the way to do it is we start small, we grow in our country. Once we have the country market, we go regionally, and then 10 years later we go globally. Sort of the process. Whereas if you look at Silicon Valley and some of the others, like we grow big fast. Yeah. And there's a very different mindset in terms of growth, right? It's always there's a lot of risk involved and so on. Do you see that this is a mindset thing, or it's just it's something that we need to change here, and we need to take more risks, we need to grow faster, we need to be more ambitious, and we need to have that as part of our DNA, or it's something that it's a double-edged sword? I mean, what's your take on that?
I think that mindset came back down to the kind of domestic market that they face. US is a large country. And so as if you're looking at startup in China, they grow big fairly fast because of the huge domestic market, which means that in the past, when you start from one nation and slowly roll out, like the success formula of Japan or South Korea or Taiwan, need to get accelerated these days. And so entrepreneurs do need to think about how can I grow across the neighboring country fairly rapidly. And in the end, I think companies, large or small, do face that challenge as well, because the next growth frontier would be in this part of the world. It's not going to be in China anyways. And for multinational to crack the market from Vietnam to Malaysia to Indonesia, they all face a similar geographical boundary or barriers. In many ways, we do have a closer home advantage, right? Because from language to culture, we are closer to heart. And we would be less second guessing than a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. But you're absolutely right. But the good news is, again, the ubiquitous connectivity really opens up to this neighboring country so that one business model can have a higher potentiality to roll out across the region much more rapidly these days.
Okay. You know, every guest here is subjected to our Thinkonomics challenge, and Howard, you're not going to be an exception to that.
All right.
So I'm going to pick a couple of questions here. We've got a timer here, and we'll see how fast you can answer some of these guys, right? So if you could offer a newborn child only one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, so, wow. So I think there's always two mindsets, right? One is thinking about, how smart I am or how smart I can become. So it's a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So for a newborn child, if I could endorse in his mind or her mind about one belief is, is the growth mindset.
Okay. So that's the Carol Dweck's growth mindset, right? Okay, so what is beautiful to you in life? Where do you find inspiration?
Small deeds. Things that happen so small and such kind act on everyday life, or things that astonishing me, a young child giving away his seat to an elderly on a bus, or sometimes it's a shame lesson on myself. I mistaken someone getting stuck in the elevator and block my way, and I discover he or she is actually a blind person trying to navigate his way through a busy street. Is this like everyday small lesson learned, painful lesson learned, as well as small reward?
So that's really what inspires you. Okay, fantastic. If everyone became a great leader, would this world be a better place?
I think so, but it also depending on how we define leadership as well. Time and time again, we get enthralled by egoistic, successful, charismatic leaders. But in the end, I think if we couldn't leave the world a better place, what's the point? So I do agree, our world will become better if we have more humble leaders.
Definition of leadership is right. So which is more important to you when following a leader, results or inspiration?
Inspiration. I mean, results subject to change. Everything can't stand for time forever. Even when you come up with the best, Henry Ford, and now we are running into greenhouse effect. Right. So result never stood this test of time, but inspiration could.
Okay. And if you had all the money in the world, how would you change the world?
We've got to rethink about capitalism, I think. Coming out from the business school, I think capitalism right now suffers a legitimacy issue. So if I can have all the money through the world, then we could probably can reconstruct how we want to organize our society, how wages should be set, how economic transaction can be conducted.
Fantastic. Great answers to the challenge. A couple more questions before we end. If you were to give advice to a group of CEOs, right, and they had just gathered out here and 500 CEOs, what sort of one piece of advice would you give them? Something they need to really think about and take to heart?
Yeah, I think we are facing a generational shift. The millennials are becoming the biggest working cohort of large workplace, and they are the ones who hold the critical knowledge for a company to thrive over the long run. So I think from board members to CEO to business unit leader, we've got to understand what is their dream and hope and fear as they go through their career. They all understand it's not going to be lifetime employment. So what's in for them? what makes life interesting and aspirational for them. That would be the kind of thing as business leader today to dive into.
Fantastic. My last question, and it's a simple one. If somebody says, I want to be like Howard Yu, I want to be like you.
That's the answer.
I want to be, this young, exciting academic who succeeded in life. And these are just young graduates that's just graduating out of university. So what would your advice be to young, fresh graduates?
Yeah. With strong caveat, then I would encourage to create a shift of environment every now and then. Radical shift, perhaps move to a new country, perhaps a shift of career, so that you discover the great unknown and opportunities would come.
And this helps you keep learning and help you
keep learning, and new lucks would come onto your way.
I like that, new lucks.
Yeah.
Very nice. Howard, thank you so much for being here on the show. It's been fabulous having you here.
It's my great honor and pleasure.
Fantastic. We've been speaking to Howard Yu, professor at IMD Business School in Switzerland.